So welcome. You're seeing some chatter in the comments about euphonium and bagpiper, and the thing called bagpiper's lung. Ralph is sending that to me. As he said, there were questions yesterday about avoiding transmission of COVID-19 if you're a wind instrument player. So again, maybe not so much mainstream. Maybe that's just for us geek wind instrument folks. Another item that is mainstream that's not on our topics today is to go back and refer to Joe Riley's comments about vitamin D. Dr. Manson at Preventive Medicine at Harvard came out with a video on Medscape, I believe it was yesterday. And then John Campbell in England picked it up. And again, they're starting to go back and quote, I believe it's the Indonesian study. The Indonesian study where it showed that it was a huge difference. It was like an odds ratio of 10 to 12 if you had inadequate vitamin D. Odds ratio just means, in simple English, maybe a little bit of impact on whether you got infected, but that wasn't the big issue. The big issue was whether or not, if you got infected, whether or not you got COVID-19, the serious infection. And what that odds ratio meant was you were 10 to 12 times more likely to get COVID-19, the serious infection, if you were deficient in vitamin D. As Joe said, Eric Berg put something out on that recently. I think that Indonesian article is getting more and more airtime. I looked it up this morning. It looks like a fairly well done study. They basically just, I'm not sure why they were able to do this, but they went back and found vitamin D levels on people that had been patients and people that had died. So evidently in the Indonesian hospital, they must have been getting vitamin D levels on everybody coming through the door. Anyhow, for many of us, especially folks that watch this channel, all this buzz about vitamin D isn't new news. It should be new news, except the fact that, again, more attention being played to the fact that vitamin D is very important. We've got about, gosh, at least a dozen videos on it. Some introductory information on it from a couple of years ago, but I went back and started looking. We had some updates just a few months ago. And we've had, 3 or 4 videos in the COVID series that talk about vitamin D and potential impact for COVID-19. Now, how does it do it? Well, vitamin D has a significant impact on our immune system. Our immune system has some cells, you may remember we talked about these, killer T cells, whose job is to go out and kill even our own cells, if our own cells get infected with a bad virus, or our own cells if our own cells happen to become cancerous. Now, if you've got those killer T cells, you need to have something else that modulates those and decreases that impact. So as you see, and to get back to the euphonium and bassoon analogy, the immune system is a symphony. It's got a lot of different players in this symphony, and vitamin D helps orchestrate, helps direct the members of that symphony. But today was not about vitamin D. I just had, or about symphonies and spreading COVID through wind instruments. I just had to get a couple of those comments in before we got started. Today's about mutant coronavirus that emerging. Pardon my, I'm stumbling around with some of the words. There are mutants, and this is not scaremongering. This is actually something that we would expect on a regular basis. You see this with any pandemic, and we usually have pandemics on seasonal flu. To give you an example, there are a couple of different definitions for pandemic. The one that I'm using right now is any infectious process that starts in multiple countries and develops multiple different sites of growth of an epidemic, more than the usual number of cases. So you see that with the seasonal flu. You see that with coronavirus. I'll get into a little bit more details on what these mutants look like and what we can expect. It might not be as scary as it sounds. Upcoming topics. Coronavirus may have been in circulation long before we identified it. And that's also, just like this mutation thing, that's not a big surprise. And can herd immunity be achieved without vaccines? That one, I believe, is going to be on Facebook tomorrow. Previous topics, we had a long session with Doug Thompson, Dr. Thompson, the dentist, yesterday on how to protect yourself when you go to a dentist's office as we start getting back out into the world. Fewer people doing social distancing is demonstrated by cell phone information, privacy issues with contact tracing apps, inaccuracy of death certificates, COVID-19 issues occurring in children, like similar to Kawasaki's disease, mysterious blood clotting complications with young people having very serious strokes, and pulse ox, a way to focus on knowing whether or not you're going down that hill if you get COVID infection, or whether or not you're doing well with COVID. We've talked about remdesivir, 30% improvement in hospitalization and mortality rate. We've shared with you multiple times. We've got some services in case you need them. I've got more than enough to do these days, but for folks that have significant problems with just getting urgent care during the COVID lockdown, we have some resources for you. One of the most important things you can do is know whether or not you have insulin resistance. Insulin resistance is one of those things that really messes up that orchestra of the immune system. And unfortunately, it appears that maybe half or more of adults age 30 and over have prediabetes. And that's just measured by, that was research that was done just a couple of years ago by UCLA School of Public Health. And that was just as measured by hemoglobin A1C or fasting blood glucose. That was not including things like an OGTT, oral glucose tolerance test, or an insulin survey. So as you start looking at those more sensitive items, you begin to realize that maybe more than half of us adults, not just 60-year-olds, but adults, have this problem. So you may want to go to your doc. You may not. There's plenty of data that indicates that most primary care docs do not know how to diagnose and or treat prediabetes. So we've got some webinars that are very inexpensive on figuring out how to know whether you're suffering from this and at risk. There are some people who already have a head jump on that, people that have had a CIMT webinar. But unfortunately, after getting it, they couldn't find a doc who knew how to help them interpret that. We also have webinars available for that. And we've got some books, a book coming up. It's a slow process, very painful. It's like that old statement, waiting for Godot. We'll get to the mutant topic, the feature topic today, right after Carl gives us the water ball. A mutant COVID-19 virus. That sounds like that sounds like zombies or The Walking Dead or some other fear-mongering kind of thing. But let me go back and just make this comment. As I said before, whenever you get a pandemic, viruses do tend to mutate. And here's what happens. When you get a mutation, there are certain mutations that create advantage. Most often, when you start seeing mutations, they tend to become A, more infectious, and B, quite often less virulent, cause less severe disease. Why is that? Because it's the old parasite host phenomenon. If you've got a virus that is more infectious, then it's going to beat out its competitor that's not as infectious. It's going to get to more people more quickly. And by the time the weaker virus, the less infectious, gets there, the person already has an infection. And for most of these, there is some degree of cross reactivity. In other words, cross immunity. We'll talk about that a little bit later as well. So what's the story with mutant COVID virus? In recent weeks, medical experts speculated that at least 2 coronavirus strains are spreading in the US, one prevalent on the East Coast and another on the West Coast. Scientists at Los Alamos National Library identified a new strain, which has become dominant worldwide. The new strain seems more contagious, like we said, than earlier versions. In fact, it appeared that an earlier strain started in New York, and within just a few days, this strain took over. The Los Alamos, not yet peer-reviewed study was shared on the BioRVIX site. Spike mutation pipeline reveals the emergence of a more transmissible form of SARS-CoV-2. Now, whenever the new strain appeared, it quickly infected more people than earlier strains that came out of Wuhan. Within weeks, it was the only strain that was prevalent in some locations. And again, for those of our species that are virologists, that study viruses, this is not unusual. This is what you expect to happen. Italy was one of the first countries to see the new virus in the last week of February, almost at the same time that the original strain appeared. Washington was among the first states to get hit with the original strain in late February, but by March 15th, the mutated strain dominated. New York was hit by the original virus around March 15th, but again, as I said, within days, the mutant strain took over. The Los Alamos team identified 14 mutations and focused on a mutation called D614G. That's the way they tend to label these things. And guess where that mutation was? Again, we're talking about infectiousness, or the R0, the reproductive index, R0. You may remember a lot of discussion about R0 in the past. Just how infectious is this? We know it's infectious, but maybe it's not a 13 like measles, but it's clearly more than a 1 or a 2, meaning that it's going to grow rapidly. The mutation affects the spikes of the coronavirus, and those spikes, I mean, that's where the infectiousness occurs, the outer components of a viral shell. The researchers don't know the details yet about how the mutated spike behaves inside the body. But the mutation is clearly giving the virus an evolutionary advantage over its predecessor, fueling its rapid spread, which again is what we would expect. It's a classic case of Darwinian evolution. And again, continue to think of R naught. So if you get a mutation that creates more contagiousness, then the R naught increases, and the strain of the virus with the higher reproductive index, or R naught, is the one that begins to take over. D614G is increasing in frequency at an alarming rate, indicating a fitness advantage relative to the original Wuhan strain. That enables more rapid spread. The new strain appeared in February in Europe, migrated quickly to the East Coast, I think it's the East Coast of the US that they're referring to, and has been the dominant strain across the world since mid-March. It may also make people vulnerable to a second infection. In other words, there's questions about how much cross-immunity there is between the original strain and this strain. It does cause a higher viral load. However, some things are not clear. As usual, it's not a simple picture. Why is the new strain more infectious? Again, some indication that it's those spike proteins. And again, when you look at previous mutations and other viruses, it's that not the core. The core is the RNA or DNA. It's the infectious material, but what makes it contagious usually is the spikes on the outside. Another thing that's not very clear is whether the new strain is more lethal. Hospitalization rate of 447 patients were about the same as people infected with earlier strains. So again, as I can tell you, again, one of the major fear-mongering type concerns is, is it far more worse than the previous one? It doesn't appear to be that way coming out of the blocks, and that's not usually what you see with mutations of pandemic viruses. As I said earlier, mutations tend to become more infectious but less virulent. Whether this mutant virus could account for regional variations in how hard COVID-19 hits different parts of the world. So did Italy get hit because of this strain issue? Is the US getting hit harder because of the strain issue? That's just not very clear at this point. Even if the new strain is no more dangerous than the others, it could still complicate efforts to bring the pandemic under control. That would be an issue if the mutation makes the virus so different from earlier strains that people who have immunity to the earlier strains do not have immunity to the new version. That's what we've been referring to a couple of times when we've mentioned cross immunity. Now, if you go back and look at previous ones, I'm not an expert in that area, but here's my perspectives on that. I do think the amount of cross immunity has varied based on the specific virus and the specific mutation. If there were zero cross immunity, you would think that there would have been a lot more evidence of reinfection than there has been in this pandemic. So again, given the caveat that I'm certainly no expert in this space, what I'm seeing right now does not give me a lot of concern about a totally different mutation with zero cross immunity. If it is, again, obviously a big problem because individuals would be susceptible to a second infection with COVID from the new mutation. And obviously these kind of things, these mutations do complicate vaccine research. So Carl, have you got the video up?
This new study breaks down mutations of coronavirus and says some strains are far more infectious as this virus continues to spread.
It became very evident that this new mutant form of the virus was spreading rapidly.
Dr. David Montefiore of Duke University is a researcher part of a 33-page study titled Spike Mutation Pipeline Reveals the Emergence of a More Transmissible Form of SARS-CoV-2, where his team identified 14 mutations in spike that are accumulating and says that spike is of urgent concern.
The mutation occurs in a piece of the virus called the spike protein. That's the protein that's in all of the vaccines right now.
The scientists believe a new strain of the original coronavirus in China is now dominant across the world. They say it's more contagious than the early versions and may make more people vulnerable to a second infection. The research finds it appeared in February in Europe. Italy was one of the first countries to see the new virus. Then the state of Washington was among the first states in the U.S. to get hit with the original strain by late February. But by March, the mutated strain dominated. New York was hit by the original virus in March, and within days, a mutated strain took over. The team did not report results for California.
This is an RNA virus, and it mutates fairly rapidly.
Dr. Jane C. Burns, director of the Kawasaki Disease Clinic at Rady Children's Hospital and at UC San Diego, says researchers are trying to identify which new strain came from which location.
Perhaps we have a different strain of the coronavirus here, that ours is more the Asian strain, and on the East Coast, based on sequence data, it's the Italian strain.
Dr. Montefiore says the mutation has been identified in the spikes of the exterior of coronavirus, which allow it to enter human respiratory cells.
That's how it attaches to cells and gets into cells.
He says if you are already infected with COVID-19, that's the spot where your antibodies would block the virus from infecting you again. But with this mutation, your immune response might not be strong enough. If the virus spread doesn't decrease in hotter weather, the study says the virus could undergo more mutations, which could drastically impact treatment.
We're concerned that the mutation in this new form of the virus will be a problem for the current vaccines.
Still, scientists' reactions to the study are mixed. The report was based on analysis from more than 6,000 coronavirus sequences from around the world.
So thank you very much. Clinton N says less contagious version. Again, a less contagious version is going to not take over like a more contagious version is. I hope that became clear as we went through the details. Dave Murphy, good morning. 98%. We're talking, as you see, there's a lot of folks that share their O2 sat, their oxygen saturation. Got tested for COVID this morning, waiting 72 hours for results. Not symptomatic, just enough tests in my area. A bit disappointed that it's not antibody testing. There are continued challenges with antibody testing. Thanks, Dave. Joe Riley, 96%, 71 beats per minute. So just as a clarification for others that have not seen this information, basically in the O2 SATs, let me see if I have one here. We talked about getting an O2 oxygen saturation device. It's a little device, used to be $20 until COVID-19 happened, and now they're $60 on Amazon. And here's the importance for it. If you do get COVID-19, or if you do get SARS-CoV infection, the respiratory infection, one of the key things that happens in terms of risk is that people begin to lose their oxygen level. It's not something that you normally notice. So we talked about, there are a lot of folks that would suggest using that to watch your own oxygen saturation rate. People get into levels that are very, very low. For example, O2 saturations in the 60%, and usually that's a big deal. That's very concerning. But they're sitting there in the ER working on their telephone. So that's one of the problems that's a big issue for us that are staying at home. If you happen to get COVID-19 infection, you want to know if you're starting to really drop your O2 saturation rate. You're likely not to notice that drop. So again, you can get these on Amazon. And one other thing I would suggest is, unlike me, you might want to read the directions. Took me 2 weeks to get mine to work, but I am what I am. Ralph Alexander Lott, not sure I'd do anything differently with a positive test result. Continue to physically distance, stay home as much as possible, clean my euphonium, the obvious things. Again, we mentioned the euphonium a few minutes ago. Euphonium and bagpiper's disease. What's a euphonium? And what's it got to do with, euphonium is something like a baritone. It may actually be the baritone itself. Ralph, I agree to a point, but I've been working the entire time. I'm assuming that's driving that truck. Staying home isn't an option unless I test positive. The other precautions are good. So from Dave's perspective, again, in working with employers on trying to get help get people back to the work world, the antibody test is a big deal. And the frustrations with the antibody tests are also a very big deal. Oh, what does it have to do with COVID-19? What does the euphonium have to do with COVID-19? Again, we were talking about playing wind instruments safely. Thank you again, Ralph. Robert Simpson, good morning. Who's making the claim that COVID-19 exists? Not even going to touch on that one. Good morning, BJJ, and thank you for the super sticker, super stamp, whatever what those things are called. From Temecula, California. Great dental podcast yesterday, Dr. Brewer. Very informative. Thank you, Chuck. Thank you, Chuck. We appreciate that. Again, we're going to have two different versions of that available. One where Carl just splits off the program piece, the primary program, and the other one where he includes the questions and answers. It's helpful because the Q&A can expand it out to over an hour, and most people, when they're looking at it, start thinking, it looks interesting, but I don't think I can do an hour. Speaking of the dental piece, there is the good doctor, Dr. Douglas Thompson. Good morning, Doug. How are you? Humanitarian vegan. I take 50,000 milligrams of vitamin D once per week with K2. Humanitarian, you may want to check, thanks for sharing, and you may want to check a couple of things. One is, I'm guessing that milligrams might be international units. The other thing you might want to check is the K2. How much K2 are you taking? Most of those combination programs give you like 100, 125 micrograms of K2. I believe that's the correct unit. And when you start looking at some of the only studies where they've actually impacted prediabetes, it was in higher amounts, like 300 and 400. So that's why I tend to not use the mixed vitamin D3 K2 amounts. I take them separately. I take K2 in a couple of different ways, a specific K2 supplement. I also take natto powder in my morning coffee or morning slushy. It tastes really bad, but it's like Listerine, really bad once a day. Janice and some of our more established patients have been having some conversation about comments I've made. We've finally gotten an organization around developing what do we recommend. And we had some conversation today on, we've been supplying this organization to current patients. And here's what I mean. I get started talking about K2 or vitamin D3 or one of the supplements, and we can go down a lot of bunny trails. And it can take a lot of time. I've got, several dozen different videos on supplements ranging from D3 to K2 to niacin and other big ones. So how do you get that information out to folks? The free videos is one way of doing it. But patients will routinely say, Doc, all of that's really fine, but it's kind of geeky. Can you just tell me what you do? Or can you just give me a set of recommendations? And that's what I'm saying we've organized. We've developed an organization where we can send you a specific recommendation for you and for your conditions. Lori, our nurse, has been working on that with Michelle and me for the past few months. Jerry Kurth is a volunteer who used to run a large supplements program. And all of us have been doing some work on this. We're getting this organized now. Our next group, besides our current patients, is to go back to previous patients. So we're working on that. And then we're going to be working on a way to get that out to subscribers and viewers. So thank you very much again, Humanitarian Vegan, for the comment. It gave me an opportunity to talk about how we can get better better recommendations out there for supplements. And let me just say, go back to the original comment. There's a lot of information out here indicating that vitamin D3 is critical, not only for avoiding and preventing problems with prediabetes, but now even with COVID-19. So again, great comment. Thank you for sharing. James Cantor, John Campbell came out with a new video on vitamin D this morning. Yes, I saw that, James. And John Campbell's video was basically it was stimulated by Dr. Manson's video. Hers was a brief 4-minute video. John Campbell went into detail on how to source vitamin D and went for about 21 minutes. Now, one of the differences that you'll see with me is most other people on the internet regarding specifically vitamin D is this. I'm routinely seeing patients and we're routinely getting vitamin D levels. I can tell you there are a couple of things that are just common knowledge that I've got some concern with. And one of them is this statement that if you're getting out into the sun, you're getting the vitamin D that you need. In fact, if you go back and you look at the specific literature around this area, you see some people that will say 15 to 20 minutes of sunshine is all you need for the day. Well, then you'll see others range up to, it takes a whole day to get a day's worth. I can tell you from the advantage of being a doc, seeing patients routinely, getting their history, finding out how much they are out in the sun, and looking at their actual levels. The history in the sun, the history and the level in the blood don't seem to correlate very well. We'll often get a husband-wife team, and the husband says, yeah, you know, now that I'm retired, I'm playing golf like 4 days a week in Florida, getting plenty of sunshine. The wife is doing mostly indoor activities, and neither one of them are supplementing, and she comes in with a much higher vitamin D blood level. Another thing that I really personally, from my experience, think is a myth is this statement about the latitude lines. You know, I think in the U.S. it's the latitude. It's about 2/3 the way down continental U.S. and it may be San Francisco to Atlanta or something like that, with the assumption that if you're below that, you get plenty of vitamin D, and if you're above it, you don't. Not seeing that in our experience either. And again, this is what, 5 years worth of seeing patients, asking them about their history, knowing where they live, and all over the country, all over the world now. And getting blood levels, and not much correlation on either of those things. So again, we've gone back and developed some ways to access this information, to access getting the right information for you. So we're working on making that available. Black Bubbles, is this guy pro-tracing? Or, well, I'm not sure what you mean by that. BJJ, I've encouraged my friends and family to take 5,000 international units of vitamin D daily. That's a really good point. Watching Ivor Cummins, 8 to 10 times mortality rates in COVID for those deficient in vitamin D. Yep, Ivor's been out there too. And there's a lot of crossover between mine and Ivor's channel. Because of that, I invited Ivor to do a couple of things. He said he was interested in doing it, but I haven't heard back from him. I understand. These are busy days for me as well. But you bring up a really good point. Vitamin D can kill you. It's not something that's totally innocuous. People have died from vitamin D. And here's where they tended to die. It's where you had folks getting these 50,000 international units doses, but they were taking them once a day rather than once a week. You have to be very careful with that. That's a very common way of getting vitamin D poisoning. You tended to see that in some places in the Middle East where they had specific pockets of significant vitamin D deficiencies. I've actually had a video or two with patients. There was one patient that came to me that had a vitamin D poisoning going on. The same thing had happened. She had seen a doc. The doc had prescribed one of these 50,000 international units dosages. Don't know if the doc communicated poorly or her nurse, or if the patient just wasn't listening, but the patient was taking this 50,000 international units daily for more than a couple of weeks. When the patient came to see me, she had a blood level of like 115. And yes, deaths have occurred as low as 110, 105. So she was clearly in a dangerous area. There are not a lot of emergencies that happen in preventive medicine, but that was at least at minimum urgent. We got that value. We would call that a panic value. We called her immediately. I talked with her, explained what was going on. She acknowledged, yep, I've been taking too much. She stopped within a few months. She did have some kidney damage. It appeared to be temporary. And she did, her levels came down, her kidney function improved, and she's been doing fine. She was already doing fine by the time we did that video. She agreed to share her story with others. So if you have interest on that, maybe Carl or Chris or one of us can give you a link to that specific video. Dave Murphy, thank you so much for the super chat. Thanks again, and a shout out. Thank you to Michelle for her help in getting me started in the PrevMed process. Thank you very much for sharing that too, Dave. We were in a meeting yesterday, and Michelle made it a point to jump out so she could talk to you and get you started. We're very excited and looking forward to meeting with you. Chair O'Sullivan, I am pre-diabetic. It's, at least you know it. Most people who are pre-diabetic don't. Now, I hope you're doing the right things. Being pre-diabetic is not a death sentence. It is if you don't do anything about it. And if you don't know about it, then how can you do anything about it? But I have patients. I had a patient, I believe it was either yesterday or the day before, very typical, came in, didn't know he'd had a sugar problem. In fact, had been told, I'm fine, you're fine. His docs were all very comfortable with him. But when you did the OGTT, his blood sugar went up to 204. And so that is one of the major specific criteria for a diagnosis of full-blown or frank type 2 diabetes. Now, most folks, there's a good news, bad news situation here. Most folks, as I said, don't realize it when they have prediabetes or even full-blown diabetes. And that's the problem. The good news is that most of these folks are not going to need insulin, and most of them can control this process, manage their lifestyle. Lifestyle is 2 and 3 times more important than anything else, and can remain and have a healthy life. And in fact, the outcome of that is this. You know, there's a concept now that you get into the 60s and 70s and you can't predict it, but you might die from a heart attack or have a stroke and become disabled for, bedridden for a decade. That's not true. The vast majority of these events can and should be prevented, but it's going to require that we begin to understand and find out when we have prediabetes and that we deal with it. So thank you, Chair O'Sullivan. My BJJ, regarding dental topic from yesterday. Since going low carb, high omega-3, low omega-6, high fiber, my gum gap decreased significantly. Anti-inflammatory diet seems to reduce gum inflammation. I would say that 100%, my BJJ. One of the reasons for it is this. as Doug and I touched on this lightly, but it's a big, big deal. There are not one, or not two things, but three things that are very linked in this oral hygiene issue. If you look up gum disease and diabetes, you'll see that they are linked very, very tightly. Obviously, diabetes and heart attack, and so therefore, gum disease and heart attack. Now, I can tell you, you start controlling, you start doing the right lifestyle issues, you start controlling, decreasing your carbs, you start controlling your blood glucose levels. That's going to have usually going to have a very positive impact on oral disease. Doug would love to see your comments if you're able to, if you're still there. Black bubbles. Sorry you don't need a doctor to tell us the majority of people are pre-diabetic. It's in our diet. It's in our diet, it's in our genes, and most of all, it's in our age. Once you get 40 and 50 years old, that's the #1 driver. But again, it's totally manageable. We can't get younger, but we can manage the other stuff. Chuck K, good morning, Doc. What should the target range be when using Libre? I had someone come in with a Libre. That's the continuous monitoring. They had it set, looked like maybe a auto, something like 80 to 160 or 180. I don't think that's a good number. What I would recommend is starting with something like 80 to 120, maybe up to 140. But I wouldn't set the higher level of the target range at anything higher than 140, because 140 is where it does appear that you're starting to get significant increase in damage to your artery lining, inflammation. My BJJ 2017 BMC oral health study found anti-inflammatory diet, low in carbs, high fiber, decreased omega-6-3 ratio, and other dental metrics. Not a surprise. Yes, I'm pretty sure it's out there in the scientific literature. Thank you, BJJ. Periodontic, black bubbles, periodontists have been looking through microscopes. I can't say about the rest of the doctors. Thank you for the super chat, BJJ. Yes, black bubbles is a straight turn in political consideration. Not getting that. I don't understand what you're saying. It's not that I don't disagree. The current tests check for the new mutant strains or just the original. I think the current tests are, I think there is cross-reactivity in terms of the testing for any of the strains that I've heard of. But I also think that we don't know how much decreased sensitivity and specificity you may have with those tests. It's a great question, Dave. Dude said Darwinian. Well, not going to get into the Darwinian. And I'm just going to leave that. Nothing new underneath the sun unless it's man-made. Sorry we got stuck on that, folks. It was one of these things where you get a lot of comments and then you click it and then all of them shoot up to the top. As much as I love the iconic shaky paper presentations, this new format is very professional and even better. Well, thank you very much. It has been a world of headache and nightmare to get away from the old shaky paper. I don't have any. What BJJ is referring to is that I used to do this on a webcam, and I would print out a picture, show something, and then I'd just put it in front of the webcam. And it was big pieces of paper, so I'd be doing this. And caught a lot of grief. A lot of people still like it for nostalgia's sake, and we sometimes go back there for nostalgia's sake. Good old Carl. Thank you very much, Robert. Yes, Carl's helping us get set up. Doug, no question, diet like you have described will reduce oral inflammation. There you have it from the expert. You know, if docs act like they never studied the Spanish flu or biological weapons don't exist, the government is always testing. No comment about that, and certainly no argument that I have no axe to grind in terms of whether this might be. I'm very certain that man is capable of using this kind of stuff as a biological weapon. Dave, you're welcome for the super chat. Robert Simpson, what is a low oximeter reading? You can get some argument about that. 60 is obviously very low. The normal tends to be 94 to 96 and above. Now, you can do fine and be fine at significantly lower than that. People with chronic lung disease walk around all the time comfortable with lower amounts than that. Again, our breathing centers within our brain tend to be driven more by what we call hypercapnia. Forget about that word. It's they're drawn more by the level of CO2 in our blood than by O2. So that's the whole idea behind watching pulse ox or oxygen saturation. So get a few normals, like you've seen these people do, and as you see, most of these are in the high 90s. If you get COVID-19 and you're routinely running, before COVID-19, you're running in the high 90s, and then all of a sudden you're down to 90 with COVID-19, and then in the 80s, I would call my doc and talk with them. If you hit the 70s, 60s, I wouldn't call anybody. I'd go straight to the ER, emergency department. So I hope that helps, Robert. The spike protein, yes, that spike protein is a critical protein for us. 97, Robert said 97% and 68 beats per minute. BJJ, thank you, Dr. Thompson, for the very informative podcast. It was great, Doug. Thank you so much. Not sure what you mean, Robert, by directions. Dave Murphy, I like Doug Thompson's suggestion that dentists check O2 along with temp. Great idea. Thanks, Doug, and thanks for your valuable information. Doug, you were very popular yesterday. You always are. Doug is a great professional. He spends a lot of his time teaching other dentists and dental staff about the bigger impact of dentistry, oral health, and its obvious impact on systemic health. Most people don't think of the dentist as helping save us from a heart attack, stroke, disability, things like that. But Doug does, and he spends his life helping dentists do exactly that. Thank you again for your work yesterday, Doug, and for what you do. So Kevin McCord, Dr. McCord's a preventive doc just south of Cincinnati. Dr. B, thanks for highlighting this information about the mutating form of COVID-19. Viral infection appears to initiate a cascade of widespread damage originating with vascular endothelial dysfunction. Yes. Thanks for the comment, and yes, that's true. Oxygen levels, bubbles. Oxygen levels, loss of taste and smell, upper respiratory deficiency in vitamin A is a correlation with low oxygen. Robert Simpson, best, most understandable medical education out there. Yes, thank you very much, Robert. I appreciate that, and that's obviously the goal. You know, the bottom line is, I started my career as an ER doc. It was fun, it was exciting, but it was also very clear that, you know, your claim to fame as an ER doc is running a code, and most of the time you're running codes on people that shouldn't have been there. So, for example, I remember, I'll give you two examples. One of them was someone who had way too much to drink and was lying face down on the pavement, got run over, and he was just bleeding out. There was nothing left of his backside, and he was bleeding from his large arteries we spent $30,000 worth of 1981 dollars saving this gentleman, and we just couldn't get him back. Same thing, a 10-year-old child had was involved in a wreck on the highway. We were able to save him, but not his family. People routinely coming in with heart attack and stroke in their 50s, in their 60s. And the bottom line on every one of these is, those may be exciting things to talk about, exciting things to manage if you're an ER doc. But every one of those should have been prevented. None of those should have happened. So that motivated me very quickly to start getting into prevention. Even if prevention is more of an education type of practice, it became really clear really quickly that it was not about me and the excitement of medicine. It was about the patients and what patients need to know to prevent disease. Because as I said before, with prediabetes and diabetes, for example, there was a head-to-head comparison. Very light medication, metformin 500 milligrams twice a day, versus a very light lifestyle management. New England Journal 5 years ago. And this light management, lifestyle management was less than 5, I think it was less than 5 pounds weight loss, or 5% of the weight loss. It was moderate. It wasn't a big deal. It was moderate exercise, and I believe it was just walking as opposed to the more aggressive resistance training and high intensity interval training. It was still 3 times more effective than the prescription. So the bottom line is, there's nothing that a doctor can do for a patient, whether it's surgery, supplements, or medications, that is anywhere near as important as what you do on a daily basis, multiple times per day. So, you know what, if it takes dedicating a career to education, then that's what you would, then it's worth it. George Zach, orchestra, is that George Zach? Orchestra, our friend used to be the director of the orchestra here in Lexington. Orchestra-related comments and how things fit together makes great sense to me. Nice work on this topic. And thank you so much, George, for your comment. Love hearing back from you. Again, George was the director of the Lexington Symphony, retired a few years ago. Bubbles, Fourth Amendment rights. Again, Bubbles, you're just way ahead of me in terms of where you are with some of the political stuff. Doug Thompson, thanks, Dave. It's a privilege to be on with Forward. Thank you, Doug. I appreciate that. Rob T07, good morning, Doc. Could you please remind me which form of vitamin C you prefer? Well, there's 3 major levels, and I know there's more than that. One is ascorbic acid, which is, many people would say, is not even vitamin C. Then there's the vitamin C, and then there is, oh gosh, I'm blanking on the, somebody help me with the word. I'm having a word finding problem. It's not hydroponic. Anyhow, there's a third type that many people say is much better. And it reminds me of anyway, I do take regular vitamin C. I don't take ascorbic acid. I take about 1.5 grams a day. I had stopped taking that for a couple reasons. Number one, high vitamin C levels tend to interfere with blood glucose management programs such as Libre or Freestyle finger sticks. The other reason is I've had significant kidney stones in the past. Ended up having that kidney stone in my kidney for over a month. 2 surgeries trying to get it out. So I'm gun shy about kidney stones, and high vitamin C is associated with it. So hopefully by the time we get back down, somebody will remind me of that ultimate level of vitamin C. And that ultimate level, I have not done the research. I can't tell you. It may actually be far better than regular vitamin C. I do think there is a case to make sure it's vitamin C as opposed to just ascorbic acid. Bubbles, thanks for the heads up on the spike mutation. Thank you so much, Bubbles, for the comment. I hear blood thinners also help. Well, here's the thing, and there's been comment and discussion about that, and it gets back to this whole thing where with coronavirus, SARS-CoV infection, you can get some interesting and significant and extremely damaging clotting problems. And uncharacteristically, it occurs in the veins as well as just the arteries, as well as the arteries. With most heart attacks and strokes, it's just clots happening in the arteries. Now, it's like some similarities to what the docs in ICU used to call DIC, disseminated intravascular coagulation. These are the ones where you get, I mentioned earlier on, where young people are getting very significant strokes associated with COVID-19. So here's where that discussion of blood thinners came up. Then the next question was, well, should we be taking some of the newer blood thinners? I haven't heard anyone go so far as to say, put people on those until and unless you start getting into that problem with significant COVID-19 infection. Now, what I have said, though, is that many people like myself have a chronic disease need for it. If you have paroxysmal atrial fib, what is that? Atrial fibrillation. Many people on this channel will recognize that term. It's the most common dysrhythmia, arrhythmia of the heart. And I know that I'm technically using the term arrhythmia wrong, but that's the more popular term. The most common problem with heart rhythm is atrial fib. It happens more and more as you get older. It happens more and more as you get deeper and deeper into prediabetes. And there's another risk factor, which I also have, and that is the genetic risk factor. There's a gene called 4Q25? Yeah, 4Q25. I got a 4Q25 variant from my mom and one from my dad, increasing the probability that the muscle cells in my heart, specifically my atria, will reconfigure faster into much more of a conductance type of cell. That's getting really geeky. We'll stop there. But you've got genetic risk factors, you've got aging risk factors, you've got chronic disease, prediabetes risk factors. Bottom line on it, we used to think that most strokes were what we called cryptic, or we didn't understand the pathophysiology. The more we began to look, the more we began to find out, and we, meaning the entire medical community, the more we began to find out that most strokes were actually probably caused by atrial fib that people didn't know that they had. So whenever this discussion about blood thinners comes up, I like to get a plug for paroxysmal atrial fib. Now, how do you know if you've got that? There are a few ways. One is you need to have some index of suspicion. The other is there's been a major development in that space. As you see, I don't have one on, an Apple Watch. I came that close to buying one, but I had already diagnosed my own atrial fib. I did it with a cheaper version. It was called iCardia. The Apple Watch was not available at that time for the cardiac, for the atrial fib look. So I would strongly consider, especially if you're a baby boomer, if you're that age now, especially if you've got prediabetes, and most baby boomers do, and if you don't know whether you have atrial fib or not, I'd strongly consider getting an Apple Watch. And no, unfortunately, the Apple, I have no financial ties with the Apple organization, and I don't get a whatever from them. But young people, 20-year-olds, other cardiologists have said, well, no, that's not, or I've heard plenty of cardiologists say, no, that's not appropriate because you get too many young people out there saying that and worried about atrial fib. No, I'm not saying 20-year-olds should do it. I am saying baby boomers, pre-diabetics, yes, consider getting an Apple Watch. OAG, Old Alabama Gardener, good to hear from you today. Thanks for tuning in. Dr. Brewer, I know you've been taking high-dose vitamin D for years. I'm 80 years old and pretty healthy. OAG has shared on our channel that he's been a patient. In fact, how I met him was he was one of those people that commented, gosh, maybe a year ago, Doc, I took your blood test that you recommended, and I'm full-blown diabetic. thanks, you may have saved my life. And we said, yep, but we think we may have. And thank you so much for listening. He got interested and actually came up here physically and saw me. We've got a couple of videos that he and I have done together, and some pics of when we got together. And OAG did some very interesting things. I think one of the things he shared was overall, he had a healthy diet. He's got a great channel, by the way. When he retired from working in the rocket industry, yes, the rocket industry in Alabama, he started making these videos. It's the ultimate home garden to table video. He'll make something, and then he'll say, look, it's really good. I wish it were here. And he shows you from start to finish, planting the garden, planting it, and weeding it and taking care of it, harvesting it, and then cooking it. Great video channel. One thing, back to what one of his major adjustments, he said, you know what, I always loved those Dorito nacho chips. I used to just eat a lot of them. I just cut that one thing out, and what did you drop, like 20 pounds? It was a big, big deal. Thanks for the comment, OAG. BJJ, you're welcome, Dr. Brewer. Please keep up the amazing podcast. We're working on that. We're having some challenges right now, as you know, we often do, but we're working on it. We'd love to keep it up. I don't get sun for 9 months in Seattle. I would supplement. As I mentioned, and maybe I didn't mention that before, on vitamin D, I do recommend that I've recommended for all my patients that they supplement. And I've been through the literature. I haven't seen any examples of anyone getting into significant problems with 5,000 international units or less. Now that's a big number. You hear John Campbell, you hear other people talking about doses. The recommended daily dose from the feds is like a fraction of that, a fifth or a tenth of that. Bubbles, fish oil for vitamin D. Janice Derrickson, thanks, George. Oh, yeah. Thank you again. Glad to see you here, George. OAG, John Tocho, OAG, you're an inspiration to all, and I really enjoy your YouTube videos. I do too. Actually, when I was young, I used to visit my grandma, and she would make biscuits, and I didn't like biscuits at that point. But, you know, as you get older, your tastes change. I got to where I loved biscuits. When Janice and I lived in Nashville, there was a place, and I can't remember the name of it right now. And they had old home-style biscuits. Just fell in love with them. At about the same time that the small batch local breweries started creating real beer. I had always hated beer until that time when I finally learned to like biscuits and beer was about the time that I developed prediabetes. Wonder if there was a correlation there. But I learned from OAG how to make low-carb biscuits using almond flour. Now, I think I'm using coconut flour. Thank you so much. Kevin McClure, vitamin D for anti-aging. I've been taking NMN, want to switch, look into NR and regular niacin. Watched your D3 video. I've got, like I said, we've got over a dozen D3 videos. You take 2 grams daily. That's in the niacin area. Single or split dose, no, it doesn't matter. With Kevin, folks, Kevin is talking about niacin here, and I do recommend for a lot of different people, especially people with Lp(a), which, if you haven't heard of Lp(a), it's a significant risk. Look up Bob Harper, The Biggest Loser, and his heart attack, Lp(a). There's a bunch of other things going on in the Lp(a) community. Antisense drugs are becoming available, but outside of Lp(a), niacin is good for high LDL, low HDL, and some other things. Recommend taking up to 2 grams a day. If you talk to most in the cardiology community, they would say you have to take 2 grams minimum per day to have an impact. I don't think that's true either. Again, just from patients that I'm following, I've had plenty of patients get significant impact from as little as half a gram. So, and do you take it split doses? No, there's no need to take split doses. What do we recommend in terms of Induracin or Rugby? Don't take one of the ones that has Lapropion in it. Lapropion decreases the flush, but it also decreases the impact. I actually just did an update on niacin. It's being edited right now. As you can imagine, it's not the old shaky paper anymore. A. Ballard, 527, cod liver oil, a big source of vitamin D. Thank you, A. Ballard. OAG, Don Tocho, thank you. Dave Murphy, I've been on vitamin D that the body can, I've heard on vitamin D that the body can only absorb limited quantities at one time. Would it be better to take smaller amounts daily as opposed to megadose? Well, here's the thing, Dave. From my perspective, the place, classically, look it up, the science, look up the literature, the experience that the other people have had. It's almost always when they're taking these mega doses, these 25, 50,000 or more, that's when they get into trouble with it. So yes, I don't recommend, I never have used it, don't recommend it for that very reason. Not those mega doses like that. I recommend the smaller doses, just like you're talking about. Jan H. read recently that anytime in the US that 1/3 of the adult population is D deficient. Is US revising MDR recos? I think you're talking about the recommendations. Yeah, well, see, there's still debate. If you look at, I've seen one statement from, in the routine labs that we get back from the National Lab, Quest. One of them had higher standards for, quote, normal vitamin D levels. All of the rest of the reports come back at 20 to 40, which are the old recommendations, the old standards. And there's been a debate for 20 years. And clearly, I think most of us who focus on this, who study this, agree that the 20 to 40 is an old number. It helps to prevent rickets, but it doesn't help for prevention of prediabetes or some of the other issues like immune function. BJJ, Rhonda Patrick also has a couple of very good, this is micronutrients is Rhonda Patrick's space. She is very good at that. And yes, she's got some good vitamin D stuff. Drew Mardella, hello, Carl, from friends in Facebook. Marcella. Oh, so Drew, thank you. Good videos, good videos about fats and carbohydrates. Carbohydrate. Joe Riley, thank you for the super chat. My trombone, euphonium, and EB alto horn are getting a good workout these days. Joe, I think, was a professional trombonist with the U.S. Army. Well, that's not very nice. It's called contact tracing about Doc. I do appreciate your work. Thank you so much, Bubbles. We appreciate the interest. John Tocho, should I aim for less than 50 carbs per day or lower to get a Libre and look at the levels? I recommend you get a Libre. I think it was a mistake on the FDA's side to say you have to have a prescription for it. So we've got a fairly liberal prescription program for a Libre if you're having trouble getting your doc to prescribe it. Also, most insurance companies won't pay for a Libre or a Dexcom 6 unless you've got way significant, poorly controlled diabetes. Again, I think that's also a mistake. And so that's sort of, again, ignoring prevention. So I hope that's helpful. And regarding carbs, what I recommend is people start with at least, if you've got prediabetes, if you've got trouble managing your carbs, limit them to at least 100 grams per day. 50 net grams per day is even better. Then you get to this whole issue of we're talking about net grams or regular, and you're talking about net in yours. So thank you again for the comment. Guys, we're going on over an hour. I have some other stuff I have to do. I really appreciate the interest, and not going to be able to make comments on Trump, but I will say, yeah, we did a graph on what states are planning to open, and next 2 weeks are big weeks for most states to start opening up. Do they have enough testing going on, and are the testing levels where they need to be? No. You would try to get, you would hope that you get 10% or less rates. And why 10% or less? Number one, that means you're doing a lot of testing. So you're getting a lot of negatives in there. You're not just testing sick people. Number two, it's also documenting that you don't have a high infection rate out there at this point. So you've got, what, over half a dozen states who have current rates of 20% or more. Yet those states are continuing to open up. So I think we're in for some turbulence as we start seeing these states open up. Some of them maybe a little bit soon, but it's a huge political battle right now. I understand why. The impact on the economy has been devastating. Thank you again for your interest, and we will plan on seeing you tomorrow on Facebook.